I'm Franklin Cooper. Because thousands of people every day hear me report the news and comment on things that have happened, or discuss topics with me on my talk show, I get a lot of feedback about the things that concern them. Increasingly, in the past year or so, that concern has been about this country of ours, this Canada. What's happening to us, I'm asked. Nobody seems to have a good word to say about Canada. There's complaints on every hand. People are downgrading the country and tearing it to bits, or at least it sounds as though they're trying to. We seem to have lost our respect for each other. It's all myself and not thyself. And as one said to me, if we don't love and respect the other fellow and his property, how can we have respect for ourselves collectively as a nation? As David, they say, rid me and deliver me from the hand of strange children, that there be no breaking in, that there be no complaining in our streets. That's why I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to introduce this record by the Reverend Jack West, an outstanding Canadian who stands up and says positively, I am a Canadian, and who recognizes what makes a country. Just as David recognized in that same psalm I mentioned a moment ago. Happy is that people whose God is the Lord.
When the founding fathers of Confederation met at the historic hour of our nation's birth, the question was asked, what shall we call this new land? Many things were said that day, but nothing was settled until one man rose to his feet, his gaze steady, his voice clear. What he said commanded the attention of all. Gentlemen, I read these words in my Bible last night, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea. The speaker continued, since this great land is bounded on the west by the broad blue Pacific, and on the east by the mighty swelling Atlantic, I propose we name this country, our country, the Dominion of Canada. And so it was. As I tried to imagine that stirring scene from history, I remember feeling proud that I was a Canadian. Where the sparkling waters of Georgian Bay meet the blue expanse of Lake Huron, in the county of Bruce stood my log cabin birthplace. From hardy pioneer stock, I was born a Canadian. My boyhood horizons broadened beyond the boundaries of my grandfather's farm with its rail fences, its cold spring water, its cedar-shaded streams, and those mysterious hiding places in the woods. In the old schoolhouse, I was often bored with reading, writing, and arithmetic. But it was there I learned more about this land and what it meant to be a Canadian. I never envied members of royalty who lived in luxury, in tall towered castles and dressed so finely, for my heritage was richer far. To me belonged the flowing streams where I fished for speckled trout. Mine was the excitement of exploring the woods in springtime and hearing the call of the wild geese winging their northward flight, and feeling that wild, free surge of exhilaration that tingled through my bloodstream and made me thrilled to be a Canadian. I remember hearing the Red Man's story, and my heart was moved to learn how that proud race camped in their teepees and in birch bark canoes braved the roaring white rapids and crossed the lakes, hunting and fishing with flint and feather, fiercely contesting the white man's conquest of the new land. Pauline Johnstone penned with pathos their sorrows, their joys, their bravery too. The Indians among us are so much a part of us, and all who call themselves Canadians. What land has more to point with pride than this, with our unique and matchless heritage? Niagara's thunderous spectacle where multitudes are drawn to view its majesty. What did Champlain feel as first white man to explore the gorge and view the mighty cataract? the seaway with its locks that bring the ocean vessels within the nation's heart, and these vast inland seas called Great Lakes, they are here, a part of Canada. Who can describe the wealth of autumn, when trees turn into flags of every dye and hue, and all the hillsides wear the tints unmatched by craftsmen with their art? Springtime in Canada eludes the poet's pen. None ever yet put on the page the half of life, the vibrant surge of growing things, orchards blossom crowned, more beautiful by far than the bejeweled adornments of a queen's brow, the hush of winter wonder, draping the woods and fields in ermine splendor. Here birds abound and wildlife in the Northland flourishes, while fish teem in the streams, making this land a nature lover's paradise, this Canada. The fruitful harvests of the vine and tree, the fields of golden grain providing bread at home and for the hungry in far lands. The bounty of this nation is a byword in the markets of the world, her forests unreckoned in wealth of timber tall, and rich the bounty of the rivers, lakes, and seas, while bustling cities thrive. Their merchandise is sent by broad highways, or by the rails of steel, or cargoes airborne in blue skies, or swift ships in the seas. This Canada. The beaver is the national animal of this land. The image of this energetic animal is stamped on our country's coins. Tirelessly he toils to cut down timber and builds his home, raising his beaver dams across the streams. He is a symbol of industry. He speaks to us of the willingness of the people of this nation to work. With vigor and strength, the fields were cleared of stumps and stones. The pioneer homes were built. Towns and cities were carved from the wilderness. Seemingly inconquerable mountains were spanned by rails of steel. And this nation was born by the dedicated toil of men and women who call themselves Canadians. No braver deeds have ever been performed than by the men who wear the scarlet coats and ride as Mounties. They kept the peace in the farthest frontiers of this Northland. The Mountie gets his man was a famous byword heard around the world. When I saw a Mountie stand tall beside the great stone arches of this nation's capital, I too stood tall and was proud to be a Canadian. I remember sitting in the galleries of the Parliament and listening to the statesmen debating the issues of having a new flag for this nation. Opinions differed, but from that meeting of the minds of the leaders of this land, there came a decision to have a flag, uniquely Canadian, a maple leaf, symbolic of the tree that grows from east to west, from north to south, providing shade for the traveler and beauty to the eye. It would be red in color, reminiscent of the color of sacrifice that has been expended to build this nation, and the white to remind us of the purity that will perpetuate it. I salute this flag and feel proud to be a Canadian. Stories of famous countrymen burned like torches in the night. The saga of Alexander Graham Bell and his telephone, of Isaac Brock and his bravery, of Grenfell of the Labrador, and thousands unknown and unsung. I am a Canadian. Etched on the walls of boyhood memories was the Armistice Day Parade. I remember watching with small boys' wide-eyed wonder, while men with medals, some with empty sleeves and scars, marched proudly down our town's main street. The band played, and we wondered why some people cried, and gray-haired mothers sold poppies red. In the classroom, the teacher solemnly said, "All must be quiet," while we remembered silently. at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the men who died. And for the first time, I knew it meant something very special to be a Canadian. Some people said that first Great War would be the last, and that it would be a war to end all wars, because war was so terrible. But soon I knew that wasn't so. A dark cloud came across our land. Another war had come, and men were called to volunteer, and by then I was a man. I knew I too must go. And on both shoulders of my uniform, it was clear to see I was a Canadian. From the windows of a crowded troop train, I glimpsed something of the greatness of this land. The northern reaches, crowned with fragrant pine, and gleaming birch, where vast resources of mineral wealth veined the rocky hills. Across the green-clad prairies, and on to the westward heights of those majestic cloud-wrapped Rockies, towering like tall castles built by God, watching the salmon leap and listening to the wind in the pines and waves in the surf. I bowed my head in gratitude to be a Canadian. Later, the train rolled northward and eastward. I stood on Mount Royal and felt the surge of wonder, standing where Jacques Cartier had stood long centuries ago. A multitude of memories throbbed in my mind of Samuel de Champlain, of the voyagers. They too had walked these hills, the great St. Lawrence crossed. I thought of all the blends of bravery and sacrifice and toil and faith woven into the tapestry of this nation's history by men who call themselves Canadians. The lonely lakes were wild loons call, and through Acadian villages where high tides flow, added to my wonder of this land's varied heritage. Lighthouses guarding jagged rocky shores, this part of our land enhanced with stories of Evangeline. I thought of other women, brave as their men, the trail that Laura Secord walked her perilous pathway through the woods, to bring the garrison the word that turned the tide for victory. I am a Canadian. 'Tis on Prince Edward Island stands the house where first the fathers of Confederation met. I sailed from Halifax, but not before I saw the famous Signal Hill, where man first heard that transatlantic message on the wireless. We sailed past Newfoundland, where fearless Vikings had landed centuries before, and soon that land, brave Newfoundland, would become a part of this land, this Canada. I remember D-Day. It happened while we crossed. Over the ship's radio crackled the electrifying news of Normandy beachhead. The invasion was on. I can still see the planes filling the skies, and the victory sign was everywhere. The man of the century said it so well when he spoke of blood and sweat and tears, but in the end he promised victory. The battles were fierce, the losses staggering. In some of the hardest fought fights of that great war, the Canucks went in. The courage of those men made one stand a little taller and feel proud to be a Canadian. Earlier, by a lonely, fresh-dug grave, I watched the chaplain bow in prayer. The wave-washed shores of that Aleutian Isle echoed the silvery tones of the bugler's notes, playing the last post. The buddy buried there loved life so well, but answering a higher call had carried him to a silent grave. It cost something to be a Canadian. Our heritage is not alone in having a part of sharing in that victory over tyranny cruel and hard, nor in our vast resources of this broad land, but in the freedom of faith and worship lies our richest and noblest heritage. I have stood by the stones that marked the burial of those courageous circuit riders who carried the gospel to the pioneers of the western plains. I have bowed in reverence at the shrine of the martyrs, where men of faith endured tortures and met an agonizing death fearlessly to lift the cross, the symbol of salvation in this new land. As I paid homage to such shining courage, again I felt proud to be a Canadian. In this land I wed a woman true and good, her love and faith a constant source of strength. My lovely daughters, given a gift from God, lived here, and it was here the fires of faith first burned upon the altars of my soul. I salute this land so bountifully blessed with such a vast and varied heritage of many races, many people, all under one flag, the maple leaf, the symbol of this land. And while many are telling us all the faults and evils of this nation, I wish to stand up and say there are a lot of things right about Canada. While evil forces are at work to let their influence be felt, to make this land a divided land, to crush its heart, and take from our inheritance that for which our founding fathers prayed, that for which brave soldiers died, that destiny for which heaven itself gave to us the dignity of this nation's birth, the will to struggle, the endurance to survive. I am a Canadian. I pray that this brave land shall long endure, beyond the petty plans of selfish men who meanly place their greed for power and gain above their country's highest good. Let our heritage continue to be a strong source of inspiration. Let the opportunity to serve be a challenge to future greatness. May we stand united, refusing to surrender this inheritance that is ours. And may we continue to be grateful that we are Canadians. Other sinister forces incessantly seek to destroy us. To those who would mar our cities by crime, who would oppress our youth by enslaving habits, while our homes are assaulted by shattering attacks of infidelity and broken vows, while others would cuttingly ensnare us with foreign ideologies, while economic woes undermine this nation's strength, some point hopelessly to corruption in high places, and in futility ask, what's the use? But I am a Canadian. I believe in our nation's destiny. A new climate of spiritual strength is being felt in this land. As the native son returning from serving God in other lands, I am aware that something good is happening here. In churches and chapels and places of prayer across this nation, men and women and inspired youth are claiming that great unalterable promise. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And many across this land are taking that promise to heart. I am a Canadian. My heart relives a moment rich in memory. It was after the close of the Second World War. I had stopped to buy a poppy in the street one rainy Remembrance Day. As I returned to my hotel room, I relived some of the memories of those war years. Voices long silent seemed to whisper to my soul. Faces seemed to peer from the art galleries of the past, of men, buddies, who did not come back. I share these lines with you now that came to me then. I wear a poppy red today, and silent bowed my head to pray, when from the far land of memory there marched a long, thin line, their faces grimed with battle smoke, their shoulders sagging neath a pack, comrades in arms who came not back. and so I wear a poppy red. Theirs was a badge of wounds that bled. There's a white cross where poppies wave on silent, grass-grown, far-off grave. My poppy cost a silver coin, a hasty moment, fastened it so all could see I'd done my bit. Their red badge cost, oh yes, how much it cost. I owe much more than what I gave that woman in the rain for poppy red. I must so live that they shall not have died in vain. Those were the lines that came to me that day, and as I see in my mind's eye clear and filled with hope, not a nation divided, wrecked and broken, torn asunder, and doomed to despair and defeat, but a nation reborn with high hopes and shining courage to work, with the will to win and faith to believe, fitting us for the role for which God brought us forth to fulfill. Let us commit ourselves to God, and by His help, shape on the anvils of that commitment the kind of lives, the kind of nation that says with honor and not with shame, I am a Canadian.